And how would you grade the Federal Reserve's response function to having a pandemic and then government shutting down economies and then having to react to it, and then also the fiscal impulse that we've gotten, and then now trying to jack up rates to tame inflation? How do you think, from your perspective, how are they managing the situation, and are they doing the best they can, or is there room for improvement?
Well, they definitely have been behind in this process, and part of that I think was like poor skill, essentially, right? They didn't execute on their mandate effectively, particularly in an environment where they kept QE going and zero interest rate policy in place during a period of relatively elevated inflation, significantly elevated inflation, where they could have moved meaningfully faster to help constrain that. And in particular, signal that they weren't going to accept elevated periods of inflation. If they had tightened 12 months earlier than they did, I don't think anyone would be sitting around saying, should they, do they want to change their inflation mandate, right? People would say they might not have achieved their goal because there's lots of exogenous forces that influence inflation, but they would have maintained their credibility of trying to manage to that target over the medium term. So they were late in terms of skill, in terms of they made a bet on transitory. It was a wrong bet. Part of that wrong bet was because the pressures weren't transitory and they weren't thinking about the second and third order consequences of the supply chain shocks. And part of it was, to be blunt, they got unlucky. If they had known that there was going to be an invasion and a war in Ukraine and things like that, they probably would have tightened earlier. But the CIA didn't know that there was going to be an invasion in Ukraine, let alone the Federal Reserve. So, you can't really fault them for being unlucky. I think in the current point, the main question is, are they really using their levers effectively? And so you look at the fact that they just keep tightening interest rates, and it's sort of the devil that they know in terms of the lever that they're most familiar with. But the problem in the economy is not really that interest rates are too low. Like, interest rates are pretty high. The problem is that those interest rates aren't really having much effect on either credit creation, or enough of an effect, maybe I should say, on either credit creation or on debt service. And the real issue is, if you look across the markets, like asset prices, whether it's houses or equities, are basically at all-time highs, or so, very close to all-time highs. And so in terms of slowing down the economy, we don't really have an interest rate problem. We have an asset price problem that is not creating a situation where asset prices fall in order to sort of push people to start to cut back. And that really ties to the fact that they're not using their QT lever, right? They basically said 95 billion a month or whatever on QT, and it's come in below that, and they've just basically stuck to their guns for 12 months, which is kind of wild. Because if you go back into the 2010s period, the shifts of QE were actually quite effective monetary policy tools in stimulating or slowing the economy, very highly effective tools. But instead, the Fed basically is like, we're going to put QT on autopilot. And the result is that they're just like not using their tools effectively. So what I would think would be much more effective is moving into more QT, being more agile with their quantitative tightening process in order to hit those asset prices, and kind of laying off the interest rate lever, which is, not working all that effectively through this cycle right now.